haven't got notes for this, have you?
Well, you know, when you were speaking, you mentioned your hometown and you choked up. So what was really going through your mind at that time?
Connection. And it's something I really fear for the future about, is that our children are not connected with what's around them as much as I certainly was as a child. And space. I had the most wonderful childhood because we could roam free, and as I said before, we could smell the young leaves, we could hear rain on a tin roof. It was hard at times because we had, and we're in the most horrible drought right now. As I've said to a few people this week, I think what I've just taken a swig of here, water, will become one of the most, if not the most important currency in the world's future. And I think it was just, whether it was a subconscious awareness or a vivid awareness through my mother, to feel at one with your environment, the trees, the earth, the wind on your face, the sun on your back. It makes us belong more than when we close the door to that and we live in office towers. And so there's a lot of sentiment in thinking, talking about the country. And in Australian terms, our Indigenous people, they've been around for tens of thousands of years. And the true Indigenous people who go back all follow the storylines, which is their mythical stories all through, called Dreamtime. Their connections with all those things is just irresistible. And I will never have that, and I admire them, and I admire any culture across the planet that has them to the same extent. But all I can do for myself is to have a connection to my greatest ability, and that greatest ability brings a level of sentiment to me that makes me want to stand up and beat my chest about country Australia and the people who live in country Australia, and just the importance of looking after country.
You also mentioned your relationship with your father, and how there's a strong stoic figure maybe. And this, while you were at the Southwestern mission today, I was listening to a talk about the importance of touch. And this, it was a small YouTube talk, and this scientist was saying that they did an experiment where they put they studied two Americans in a coffee shop, two Englishmen in a coffee shop, and two Puerto Ricans in a coffee shop. And for the same, I think it was 2 hours or 3 hours or something like that, and they studied their behavior. And the Englishmen did not touch each other even once, nor did the Americans, but the Puerto Ricans touched each other 108 times. And he was talking about the importance of touch, and I can understand what you mean by, or what that would have meant as a young boy, with your father. And so I was wondering how is it, now you have a young son, he's 8, so with how is your relationship with your father, how is it with your son, how has it shaped you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, the reason why the English didn't touch was because they just come back from cricket practice and one bowled the other out. The Americans didn't touch because one was a conservative and one was a Democrat. And the Puerto Ricans touched 108 times because they didn't have time to do it 110 times. But with I think touch is most important because, once again, it's a connection, and we're social creatures, and I'm very aware of it with my son. He will be his own person, and he will develop his own individual traits, and God bless him for that. I hope he doesn't get too many of mine, but I can only nurture him in a way that I think will give him the qualities that he will need in the world he is heading into. And one of them, if not a few of them, is love and understanding and being able to be there for other people. And perhaps I was a bit hard on Dad. And he would say now, we didn't see each other for something like 12 years. It's a tough one. He loved in his own way. He was a creature of his time where you didn't show much emotion. And he had been through some incredible hardships in his life. And I can't imagine any person who goes to war anywhere on the face of the earth cannot be not affected by that experience. Anywhere, at any time. No matter how brainwashed you are, no matter what type of personality you are, it has to leave scars, whether they're physical or up there. And what Dad carried through his life, I can't imagine, and I will never know. And yes, I think you learn from your parents' mistakes, and I won't call it a mistake. I will just call it a misdirection. And if he were here right now, I would hug him. Yep.
This morning we were talking about, and what I would call choices. You made certain choices in your life, and one of them was, so this morning we were having a walk in Korean Park through the lanes, and James told me that in 1999 he got a call from the chairman of the Australian Cricket Board, or the president of the Australian Cricket Board, asking him to be the media manager for the Australian cricket team. And that was because Steve Waugh had recommended, they put out an advertisement, and Steve Waugh said, don't bother checking out anybody else, just ask James to do the job. And James told me that he turned down an offer to be the media manager of the Australian cricket team. And a couple of years later, Malcolm Speed became the president of the ICC, and James would have he took his entire team to Dubai. So my question is kind of twofold. One is choices in your career, and what led you to that choice, and what most people would have jumped on that. It would have meant a great life of airplanes, probably private jets, and 5-star hotels, and a lot of money and fame, and so that's one.
And match fixing.
So I wanted to ask you about not just choices in your career or your professional life, but also choices in how did you choose your subjects for your books? How did they choose you?
To go back to the media manager with the Australian cricket team, it just wasn't right, and it wasn't the right timing. I thought about the decision, and I thought about it with my partner at the time, and that of course would have taken me on an entirely different journey. But once you make a decision, you stick to it and you move on. And I would not have had the opportunity to explore the world, and I would have, but it would have been up there in the stratosphere of 5-star, not so much on the streets. Like my wife and I, we took a year off and went backpacking through, and we did volunteer work in East Africa and South America. And that gave me, by then, I'd wanted to do it because of the path I'd chosen. If I'd gone along that more corporate path, it wouldn't have happened. And I think even then, although I wasn't fully aware of it, it was about meeting people and learning from them and the stories. Once again, it's inbuilt. It's inbuilt in all of us to various ways. It leaks among our pores more so in others than some than others. To answer the question about the books, it's varied. The last book, Bernie Shake Shaft, who is one of the most remarkable men I've ever met, a publisher came to me with that idea, but I knew about it. So then we got together and the fit was right, and the book comes about. Sometimes the publisher comes to me, sometimes I go to the publisher with an idea, and when I do go to the publisher, quite often they say, yeah, it's a good idea, but in the Australian marketplace, it's very much a case of, let's check with the accountants, what will sell? A great story, but it won't sell. So let's do a story on how to lose 10 kilos in 3 months. That'll sell. You're limited by the limited vision of the publisher, who is in turn driven by profit and loss, which is the cold, harsh reality of it. And that's been the way all the way through, but it's becoming more so.
You also mentioned that this would probably, you won't want to write another non-fiction book for a while.
Well, yeah. I think I'm at a turning point in my career and in my life, and more is about educating children. Dave at the back, and spending time in classrooms and using the processes of story to explore what's out there, because to me, it's a simple formula, but it's one I don't think any of us do to the great extent it could be used for, and that's stories are based around who, what, where, why, how, and when. Once you've got that, then you add the colour, then you add the moments, then you add the emotion, then you add the subplots and the plots of the overall narrative. But you get the who, what, where, why, how, and when, and you build it from there. That's the building block. So I am going more into the education field, and I've so enjoyed meeting the children in the schools I've visited here this week. There's a real energy, a real enthusiasm, and I hope to meet more in the years ahead. Perhaps I'll write books with children. Like Rhea came up with one thing she said at the storytellers meeting last night. I asked her how she felt out of 10, and she said, "What did you say? What do you have?" Yeah, you stand up and tell everyone, turn around and stand up and tell everyone how you felt out of 10 last night.
I did
12 out of 10 she was last night. That's a terrific theme for a children's book. The 12 that wanted to be a 10. And those sort of things I think now are worth exploring for me. The older I get, and now going through an educational journey with my son, I wanted to be part of it. And I firmly believe that we can do more for our children in the education area, if not everyone, but in the education area in particular, if we use narrative more than we do, and more effectively than we do. It is such a good learning tool because of how we connect. It's how we're wired.
I think two things right now that seem to be real issues in the world today are politicians all over the world. In the US, now in England, in India, in Brazil, who seem to be so divisive. What's it like in Australia, and what's your view on some of that, where we're going, and how do we? Your work brings people together.
In Australia, it's interesting. It's like every country, it has its problems, and it has some big problems, and I would put right at the top of the list the environment. And at the risk of offending some people here, climate change is very real. It's very real, and I look at it in some ways through the eye of my mother, who grew up during the Great Depression. She went through some of the greatest droughts in Australian history, and she's seen many things, and she's worried. And she's worried for my son, and she's worried for how we're heading and how we're going to leave the planet. The drought I mentioned in Australia, she said that's now the norm, that's not an exception. And it's been going for so long now, I tend to agree with her. Yet, our conservative politicians won't hear of it. All these meetings about environmental control, pollution control, carbon dioxide, it's just, it's hot air to a lot of them. They won't follow through. It's rhetoric. It's political rhetoric. They'll say something because it'll be a 10-second news bite that night on television or on radio or on social media. But they don't follow through with action. And there are many other issues. Our treatment of our Indigenous people is disgusting. absolutely disgusting. We have a big country, we have small population, and relative to what's happening in the world, we can do more for immigration, and particularly asylum seekers and refugees who are fleeing persecution. You look at the definition under the United Nations. Yes, it's 70 years old now and it does need updating. But we need to do more for people who, this I'm saying about Australia here, who do need help. And it's a political hot potato because historically in Australia, we had a whole mass of illegal immigrants come through via boats during the 1970s with the Vietnam War. And it caused a real division, but our political leader of the time, come on, you've got to do more for these people. Since then, the geography has changed where boat people have now come in from the Middle East. The Middle East is a big area. And yes, some people don't have legitimate, real stories, and how you actually find out whether they're real or not is very, 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 very hard. But we've got to try. So what do? We've had a history of putting them in behind bars on islands outside Australia, putting them in detention. And welcome to Australia. And it's not human. It's not the way we treat people. So we look at those, and of course we can do more in education, in health, in road infrastructure. They're daily issues. But the big issues are how we treat people and how we treat our environment. And we're not doing it well. I wish we had Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister. In fact, New Zealand really should be another state of Australia, and then she might be able to come across. Open that door. Hey, Jacinda. How are you going?
Accepting cricket.
Yeah, the poor people. That was unfortunate, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, even with that, the World Cup final, I would argue that New Zealand lost but still won. There's a beautiful, I'm sure some of you are aware of this, but the All Blacks, their rugby union team, which is, they're up there, the rest of the world is there in quality, and there's a World Cup coming up in a couple of months. But they have a policy, now these guys are elite, they're the Virat Kohlis of New Zealand. After every game they play, they have to leave the dressing shed in the condition in which they found it. So they sweep the shed. So you have these superstars putting the plastic bottles in the bins, picking up the bits of paper. All right, guys, it's clean. Off we go. There's a saying that sport does not build character, it reveals character. The All Blacks are, they're up there. Good team, better people.
I'll open it out. So, can you explain what was the work you did with the children here?
Yeah, just for those who couldn't hear, it was what work did I do with the children, and thank you again to Tanya. And if you want to meet a person who's passionate about Indian children and their education, have a chat with Tanya. You probably can't see her in the dark, but she's up there. It's basically just meeting them and talking them through the processes of storytelling, as far as the who, what, where, why, when, and how important that is. And unfortunately, we lose our sense of curiosity the older we get. And there's been academic studies about that with children, and the older they get, even from the ages of 3 through to 13, their levels of curiosity diminish. We should encourage them all. So I keep telling the children to always ask questions, be curious about anything. Why is there a leak in the roof right above my head? There isn't, push it. But just continually ask questions. And importantly too, I've spoken a lot about IT. 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 What's IT? Income tax. How much do you need? What else could it be? Information technology. To me, it's imagination time. And I look at that because of, once again, my son, Iggy. He, a few years ago, he's now 8 years of age. When he was about 3 and a half, I took him out into a thunderstorm and he saw a bolt of lightning, and I told him what it was, electricity, and it didn't register, it wasn't important to him. But after one bolt of lightning, he said, "What's on the other side?" Well, what do you mean, mate? What's on the other side of the sky? There was a crack in the sky. The sky opened up through the eyes of a child. That's a message for every adult here. Through the eyes of a child, and using your imagination and using your curiosity to look through that crack or to see that crack in the window. You could look at these flames and, yeah, they're flames, but what would a moth think of them? If you saw a moth going around them, what do they think? That's what, if a moth came here right now, what would Iggy think, or a younger child like Dave at the back? And we should fuel their interest and just tap in, put the plug in. There'll be much more energy in them than there will be that we needed tonight. Put the plug into them and absorb their energy and their level of curiosity. So that's what I've been talking with the children about, and just being, I think, and Tanya could tell you more about this, I think I actually got more out of it than they did. But it was an absolute joy to be with them. In fact, one boy gave me a pen, we swapped pens, and very quickly, among many endearing moments at one school, high school children, a girl introduced me, and a boy said thank you at the end, both on a microphone in front of their peers, so quite nerve-wracking for them at their age, early teenage years. And the principal came up to me afterwards and said, "Do you mind signing something?" that their speech, they'd actually said, this is the first time they'd ever used the microphone and actually publicly stood and spoken. And I thought, oh, it made me well up. And they were so proud. They were so proud of that moment. Own that moment. Take it with you.
Just to give you context, Amol homeschools a lot of children. He lives in a rural setting, and he has created a network of homeschooling teachers who would then even tutor kids in English over the phone. Amol, you can say a little bit more about what you're doing.
Do you know Tanya? You need to meet Tanya.
So, yes, sorry.
Come on into the flame.
James is calling you?
No. You have to get up and dance to the rhythm.
Okay. Hopefully it'll be fun. Yeah.
So we are in the remote area, Andhra district, 300 kilometers from here, in the tribal area, and we are trying to teach English through stories. I mean, English is a very aspirational language in India. Children there cannot get exposure to English because the teachers themselves cannot speak English. So we pair a child with a tutor in the city, and they both read a story. They're trying to improve their English story.
Well done. It's quite a long science project, this one, isn't it?
Some more questions?
Like, in life,
Did you happen to meet Mike later?
No, but I wrote a blog only recently, and through that blog, someone had an email for him, and the blog was sent to him, and he wrote back to me, and So I wish I had, because he was a very different cricketer. He was obviously a cricketer of his time, and he was very much of the vintage that you chose the captain first, and then your players, because he would readily admit himself he perhaps wasn't the best batsman going around at the time. But I'd still like to meet him. He's a very cerebral man. Yeah, so he's just one of so many people I'd love to meet him. I hope we get the time to.
He lives in Ahmedabad. He's married to an Indian lady.
Is that right?
Yeah, and we've been in touch. So I'm trying to get him to Loft.
Really? Yeah, fantastic. Let me know when you're there.
I will.
And I'll swim back from Australia.
But I will tell him about this when he comes. Sorry, you were saying. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Alvin.
I think pleased to meet you.
So you had mentioned about how the indigenous population is treated casually over there.
Yeah.
We do know about stories as to how they were treated when the colonists first came, but how are they treated now?
Yeah, the question is how are the Indigenous Australians treated now? And historically, when white settlement first came, there was slavery, there was a lot of slaughtering as well. Now it's such a confused issue, because periodically things have been tried to be done well for them in the eyes of a Westerner, and this is one of the issues. And there's a term that I am very fond of actually exploring, called ethnocentrism, and it's where you judge your own cultural standards and values and understandings with another culture. For example, someone who may come to India and go, take a bus and click, 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 click. Oh, aren't those crickets dirty? Aren't those people dirty? And I think there was a little bit of that going on with some of the political decision making when it came to doing good for the Indigenous. Money was pushed into better housing for them. They don't care about housing. Their systems, their beliefs, they're one with the earth. They're quite happy, traditionally, in gunyas, which are little shelters, or sleeping under the stars. They don't need all the mod cons. But when they were introduced in a way that it created a collision of cultures for those who started to accept it and for those who didn't want it, then such things as alcohol was introduced. Alcoholism is rampant in Indigenous areas, and it's one reason why they've got a very, very high rate of diabetes and early death rates. The average age of an Indigenous Australian is less than other Australians. There are many. Are we doing enough in education? Are we doing enough? The fact that most of these people live in remote areas to begin with, it's harder to get the right standard of education to them. And when we do, what is that education? Should we be educating them about the modern ways, or should we be more so enveloping what they learn and understand? There's got to be a marriage somewhere, but to this day I don't think we've done it as well as we should. And now, arguably more than ever before, because they were the great caretakers of Australia, and they have been for tens of thousands of years. I remember while writing Back on Track, my last book, speaking with an Aboriginal elder, and he just said, among many things, but one that you lock it away, just like we're for a pocket bridge, you can't lock it away. Rivers are our lifeblood. When the rivers run dry, so does our blood. And so they practice taking what they need, not what they want. And it's a philosophy that we as Australians generally need to adhere to. So there's got to be more cultural understanding and a marriage of the understandings to a point where we can do better for them. But we're throwing money, in some cases but we're not doing it the right way. It's not money. In some cases they need. It's that understanding. Once you get that understanding. And you know, there are stories of, just drunk Aborigines. Well and good, there's an element, like there is in any population, where there is an element of bad. But to not understand the reasons behind it, collectively we're not doing ourselves a favour.
My name is Utkarsh, and
I like your shirt.
thank you very much. So I have a question. So during the time in your life, did you ever have existential crisis where you weren't sure as to what you wanted to do? But over the years, when you experienced all these things, the stories that you told us about how you met people and how you experienced and explored places.
Yeah.
So on those lines, did you ever set a vision for yourself, or did you ever very clearly know what you wanted to do and where you wanted to be, or it just happened over the years? You kept going through new experiences, and it just so happened that you reached a point where you are right now.
You evolve,
Yeah.
and you evolve because of what happens around you. So it's an interesting question, and it probably takes a lot longer answer than time restraints allow. But in a short answer, as a child, yes, I wanted to play cricket for Australia. Then yes, I'm going to be a cricket journalist, and that came true. Very quickly, the very good mate I mentioned who I brought back here in 2008. When we were children, we made a pact. He would play football for Australia, rugby union, and I would be there to report on his first match. And it came true. That dream came true. That pact between us came true. So it was a really good example. We're going to get there. When I began my professional career as a journalist, it was like travelling a map. There were so many different ways to get there, and you may want to go there, but you take this road and then all of a sudden you're over there, and gee, that's good, I'll explore that. So the professional career has been exploration, and it's been an exploration driven by experiences. Those experiences have continually pushed me back somewhere in a broad area of where I think I should go. I mentioned that I'm at a turning point now, and I firmly believe education is dead set, absolutely where I'm going. Writing, I always wanted to write books. Reporting, I always wanted to do it. Whether I did it in the time frame I wanted to, maybe not. But living in the moment, right here, right now, everything that's happened to me has allowed me to have a bit of experience, maybe not wisdom, but a bit of experience that has led me to this point to believe that I know where I'm going. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. The one there. Yeah.
That hand.
Yeah, you can't see you.
What's the hand's name?
I'm Radha. My name is Radha.
Can you stand up a bit?
Hi, my name is Radha, and I'm an artist and designer. I'm studying to be an artist and designer, and part of this process is kind of understanding context and building narratives. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, when you approach someone and ask them to tell you their story, what are some things that you think I should remember to help them open up and talk to me?
That's a very difficult question to answer, and a very, very, very good question to answer, because every story needs context. Absolutely every story. It needs that light and shade. Absolutely. So the questions you should ask, it depends on the person. Firstly, if they're approachable, you've got to get to know them. The key, it is such a difficult question to answer because of the type of person, but I think the key to exploring anything is to know that person first. Unless you're interviewing a politician, then you go in boots and all and you can ask them anything. But if it's a long exploration and you want to explore all the context and you want the greater narrative or to work out where the stories will be, you first have to know the person. And I think if you're your motives are right and your interests are right and your heart is pure, most of the time people will listen and oblige. But one thing I will say, quite often in an interview situation, people begin to specifically, okay, so you were born here, you did this, you did that. And the goal of the story may lie around that. How did you get to hospital? Where was your father? There are other issues around it, and perhaps sometimes when you're asking questions, if you start that opens up a much greater world to explore. And once again, it goes back to the individual, because like Bernie, this man, he and I approached it as this, we were just having a talk. Yes, we had a recorder on the table. We did it in his home on a long veranda, but we just talked. Sat back. He's a smoker. He's a rough fella in many ways. Sat back and just talked. And that itself became part of the narrative. And that I wrote into the storyline, that we sat around and talked, and I mentioned the moments when he'd light a cigarette, or he'd go for a walk, or whistle a dog, or the sound of a bird in a tree. That becomes important too, because all those parts outside of him help make him who he is. So I hope that helps. Listen, if you want a longer answer, if we've got time afterwards, if not, get email. I'm happy to have a longer chat with you and explore it with you. Very happy to.
Right, we'll have one more question.
Is
Yeah.
it time?
One more question. Yeah.
So,
Can somebody shine a light?
no, it's okay. Hi, this is not really a question, but something very profound you said, which is, like as we say, it's all about connections and all, which is really got me thinking. You talked about your father who served in World War II, right? And how old were you then at that time, can I ask?
Well, I wasn't born then.
You weren't born then?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was he served at the tail end, 1945. He really only served at the tail end of the war. I came along in 1967, so he wouldn't have even been thinking.
No, yes. Okay, so you heard the stories, and your father was married that time?
No, he was only a young man. He put his age up to go to war. And another very quick story about my father was that he was head prefect. He was top-notch school captain at a very exclusive school at which he earned a scholarship to. He was quite a poor boy, and he won a scholarship to this school because he was very athletic. And in his year as head prefect, back in those days, now we're talking 70-odd years ago, senior students could hit with a cane other students, disobedient students. My father took all those canes and locked them in a gymnasium storeroom and abolished student caning. And the irony is he was a very tough man to meet. But that showed the sensitivities that he had. And it's just a little story, anecdote, but...
Yeah, so what you said in connection with that was that a war, definitely a war changes a person who's been through a war would definitely have it. So I was just reflecting on that, and you know, it hit me so badly because my husband, who is here, and he would like me to talk about it, but he is, I mean, we were celebrating Kargil Divas yesterday. He's a soldier who fought in that war, right in the front. He's an artillery person. And when he came back home after 4 months, and I was expecting my child that time, our first child, when he came back home, you know, the neighborhood people would all come and say, okay, tell us the stories, so what happened, you know, this, that. And he was telling us, he was just mum. So that's what, when you talked to me about this, I was just thinking, what impact it has on the family members and on that person who's been to the war front. He came back, he was just mum, and this would go on for months, and then after many months I asked him, I said, why aren't you talking about it? People want to know. He said, do you realize what happened there? For you, it's just a story. For these people there, it's just a story. But they were my comrades, my men who were dying. It was red blood. The snow, the white snow had turned all blood. So it was then that I realized. So when you said this, it was. I mean, for you, you were relating, something about your father that it changed him, and I did find a very distinct change in my husband thereafter.
There are no winners in war.
Pardon?
There are no winners.
There were no winners in war, and in fact, he was one of the officers designated to hand over the bodies, the Pakistani soldiers' body in one of the peace missions. And I asked him, I said, how are they? He said, just like us.
Yeah.
You know? So thank you very much for, bringing up that, because it's something that, that has been bothering me for a long time, and I just keep wondering, So it really.
Thanks you for sharing it. Yeah.
So you never know what might, touch whom in what way. So connection, it's all about connections. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Umkar.
How are you going? What's it like to be in the spotlight?
I'm sorry. Now I'm conscious. So I just want to ask something that I'm pretty sure is on a lot of people's minds. Are you going to meet Rashid on this trip?
No, good question. I just don't have time. But I came back on a very quick trip, including to here, Pune, in 2010 when Brett Lee, who I wrote a book with, was playing in the band, and he did a promotional concert here. But next time I definitely want to try. I've got no idea where he is. He invited me to stay with him, and he wanted to learn about his way of life. And he wanted to teach me just everything about it. He ended up, when we ended up meeting him after the "Hello James, good to see you again," he insisted on, he's not a wealthy man, but he insisted on taking us to dinner and shouting us all chicken for dinner. And we had the most incredible evening with him. And he's both places. Very, very funny man, very engaging man, and just through the magic of coincidence, we've got that connection. So maybe you can come with me.
If I'm not wrong, I think Omkar is a journalist, am I right?
Yeah, that's
Well, it'd be a pretty cracking story for you. Or is that why you're asking? That's the motive. I've got my next one lined up.
Okay, so we've got one last question, and that's from Ria.
I don't want to listen to you.
Your father was very harsh, but in military training, like in my school, the military people are harsh.
They have to be real, and that's part of what they do.
Yes.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It's part of what they do. And you will learn all through life, different people with different jobs and live in different countries and different cultures, who have different beliefs, who eat different food, who play different sports, who go to school at a different time, who ring different bells, who wear different shoes, who ride different cars. All are different. Okay, so military men are hard. I'm different to that. You're different. And we should cherish those differences and learn from those differences. Your face is beautiful, you're growing right.
We've got one question.
It's actually a thought, not a question.
Yeah.
But the way you narrated Rashid's, so I was just wondering whether there's any way in which you could write it as a story for children to get published in India, with an Indian publisher.
Can ya?
Happy to. That's a good idea, Sujata. Yeah.
It's something that Indian children should be read.
Right, we'll look at that. We'll have to get in contact. Where's the journal? We'll have to chase him down, and that could be another. Maybe that's how we begin the story. In search of Rashid. Yeah, that's well. I'd be guided by you, but it is. It's as I say, nothing's impossible in life. It really isn't. Yeah, you're going to make me go home and think now, which is terrible at this time of night.
Kuchu, I had a request.
Yeah.
Next time when James is in town,
Yeah.
arrange for a cricket match. I want to hit him for a six.
So James, this is Dharmavir. He's a yoga instructor. He taught me yoga, and he's also a first-class cricketer.
Wow, okay.
So he played.
One good old cricketer. Ranji Trophy is on that.
Terrific, terrific. Great batsman and bowler.
Both.
Both. So you give yourselves a fair rap on both. and obviously as time goes past, you're better. You're a better player than you thought you were. Yeah. That's terrific. Oh, we should have a chat. Yeah.
You
And
again.
Just again? Yeah. Yep. Well, I'll have 10 players and you can have one. I leave tomorrow morning.
That's early?
Early. Oh, well,
Not early, but that's soon. Yes.
yeah. But I'll be back. Or as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, I'll be back.
Yeah, but I'm going to be swimming tomorrow morning.
Sorry?
Because the flights, you're going to be swimming tomorrow morning. Because all flights are cancelled, there's no trains, no
No, it just, there was,
Is that right? There are a few problems with transport?
Right? If you're
Yeah.
raining hard.
yeah.
Wow.
Okay, we'll have to check the news.
See, you mentioned twice that you swam across. So since you're fond of swimming, you're going to be swimming.
Wow, okay.
You can just take the flight.
Okay. I've got my son, Iggy, he's got his athletics carnival on August 1st, which is the day after I arrive home. So, got to be back for that, so it might be swimming. But then again, I fly quite well too. But
Yes, Priya.
When are you coming back?
As soon as you invite him back.
I'm waiting tomorrow.
I'll come back. I promise to come back. I don't know when. But we want to do things, and we want to do things with schools, and Tanya and I have been talking about a few ideas, and Pushpa and I have been talking about what we can do, and I've been talking with some of the schools here. So I will be back. I hope you still recognise me. All right? Take a good mental note. I won't change that much. Next time you won't see darkness, you won't actually see a face. Okay.
But she might be a little bigger.
You might not be able to.
Yeah. You might be off
But I
concrete.
won't be elder than you.
That ratio stays.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You might be off travelling the world telling stories by then.
Great. James, it's been 3 days. I've been able to spend. I'm so happy that you. Not happy. Happy is not the right word. For 3 days, I could actually just be. I switched off almost completely from the studio. Just being and talking and sharing, and you coming all the way as kind of in some ways when you said that you would come, and it kind of just blew my mind. I didn't think it would be possible.
Don't do that. We've only got one mind. It showed me the extent of possibility that if you reach out to someone without any expectation, anything is possible. And you proved that, you showed that. And so that was one real takeaway from these last 7 months and these last few days here. And there's been a lot of people talking a lot and a lot of things happening, and it's going to take a little bit of time to just absorb that and make something out of it, or do something with it. I hope to have you back, and hope that connections that you made here can lead somewhere good and positive. And I'm grateful that you've come all the way to not just share with us, but also to share with our future generations here. I think that's something that's great and wonderful that you can do that in such a kind way. So thank you for coming, and hope to have you back.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.